The gaming industry is being shaken up once again, with Microsoft laying off about 9,000 workers, bringing total layoffs to about 15,000 people in 2025. It seems the layoffs affect pretty much every division, including Microsoft headquarters, Xbox Games division, and more. Now, obviously, the biggest reason as to why these layoffs are happening has to do with money, money, money. Despite Microsoft's $88+ billion in profit last year, despite the fact that Xbox and subsidiaries made approximately 30% of Microsoft's revenue last year, despite the earnings of top executives going up. The human cost is the biggest short-term expense in most industries, including gaming. How much do you pay each person? The benefits each person gets, insurance, and so on. Which is why cutting out people is unfortunately the efficient way to save on expenses short-term, so your profit margins go up. Additionally, with the advent of the AI technology craze intertwined with shareholder interest, a lot of the money being allocated here from these layoffs is going to go into Microsoft's AI projects, which in themselves can have a devastating impact on natural ecosystems, directly affecting a lot of us. Of course, Microsoft Xbox isn't the only company doing massive layoffs. Sony's done it, Embracer's done it, Ubisoft's done it, almost every big player in the game has done it. But there are details here I want to cover with Microsoft's gaming layoffs, which I predicted in several videos in the past that most people didn't really care about and probably still don't care about post the Zenimax Media acquisition. So first off, Romero Games, headed in part by John Romero, who co-founded games like Wolfenstein, Doom, and Quake, was shut down by Microsoft, laying off approximately 100 people and canceling several game projects. A day before they were closed down, they were told they were making great progress by executives, and a developer has now publicly confirmed their first-person shooter, even in alpha, had enjoyable gameplay. The initiative team was shut down with their Perfect Dark IP, and other projects being cancelled as well. Rare's Everwild game was also shut down. About half the Turn 10 team that worked on Forza Motorsport was laid off. Even big-name Call of Duty's Raven Software, High Moon Studios, and Sledgehammer Games have been impacted by layoffs. Marketing teams under Zenimax Media were also laid off, in addition to a significant portion of the Zenimax Online Studios team that worked on Project Blackbird, previously known as Project Kestrel, with that 8-year project being shut down, and of course we'll talk more about that later considering our channel's history with that studio. Developer of Candy Crush, King, has also laid off about 10% of its workforce, with around 200 employees being affected. Blizzard's Warcraft Rumble team has also been effectively shut down, with the game basically being put into maintenance mode. Halo developer Halo Studios, formerly known as 343 Industries, has also seen a few layoffs. State of Decay's Undead Lab Studios also saw layoffs as well. Meanwhile, in a different corner of the gaming industry, Krafton, the publishers who own Unknown Worlds, the team behind Subnautica 2's development, changed the leadership of Unknown Worlds in a mysterious move that no one's quite sure why it happened just yet. Replacing 3 senior staff members who are also co-founders of Unknown Worlds is CEO Steve Paputzis, who worked on the Callisto Protocol. And of course, the studio that made the Callisto Protocol also saw layoffs earlier this year in February. More than likely, the Unknown Worlds leadership change may have been Krafton not being satisfied with the developers just not working fast enough to their liking. And as of this video, there's probably a lot more we don't know about just yet, and we will just have to wait to see how many more at specific entities were affected. And unfortunately, as we previously discussed, this is just the beginning of Microsoft's layoffs that throws off the trajectory of the 2023 predictions that the layoffs in the gaming industry will only occur for just 2 more years. I'm not really going to cover the whole corporate bullshit nonsense statements made by Phil Spencer, Matt Booty, or the other Microsoft executives, which essentially boil down to, we're really successful, so we're just going to lay you off. And quite a few broken promises that display how severely detached they are from any semblance of humanity at this point. For example, executive producer at Xbox Game Studios, Matt Turnbull, suggested using ChatGPT to help reduce the stress that comes with losing your livelihood. While we're on the subject of Phil Spencer though, I think it's hilarious how he has this pattern of laying off people or canceling projects he really enjoyed. Earlier this year, Phil Spencer said that they should let Rare's Everwild cook and that their progress was great. But now, Rare's Everwild is shut down. Phil Spencer, after laying off people who worked on Indiana Jones and The Great Circle, literally played Indiana Jones and The Great Circle after the announcements of layoffs went live. Phil Spencer and other executives praised Tango Gameworks' Hi-Fi Rush, and of course, look at what happened in Tango. Phil Spencer was reportedly so engrossed in Zenimax Online Studios' Project Blackbird that Matt Booty had to take the controller away from him so they could continue the meeting, which is eerily reminiscent of stories with Anthem's EA executives. Now, let's talk about Project Blackbird, formerly known as Project Kestrel by Zenimax Online Studios. This project has been the center of a lot of rumors in the MMO genre, as the only other Zenimax Online project is The Elder Scrolls Online. For the past 8 years or so, there's been a lot of speculation that the game was going to be, with some people theorizing it would be a Star Wars or Mandalorian MMO, or a Starfield MMO, or some sort of MMO. Well, we now have details from Jason Schreier, player who even got to view footage of the game. Blackbird was a third-person online looter shooter similar to Destiny and Destiny 2, set within a new franchise. It had a sci-fi noir aesthetic like Blade Runner, and placed a heavy emphasis on vertical movement. Players could use abilities such as double jumping, air dashing, a grappling hook, and wall climbing to fling themselves around tall buildings like superheroes. I saw footage of the vertical slice last night and was impressed. It was a slick-looking demo with alluring visuals and battle sequences. Zenimax Online Studios switched the code name for the project to be Blackbird because they wanted to use Kestrel as the actual game name. Xbox executives were also blown away when they played Blackbird in March. Executives had nothing but complimentary words for the project. The team finally began putting together a production plan that would flesh out the vertical slice and then build out more content for release. The team also had to build a brand new game engine for Blackbird. So the Xbox executives got to play this game before anyone else, and then pulled the project, laid off people that were working on it, which undoubtedly some of those people who were previously temporarily or permanently allocated to help on the project from The Elder Scrolls Online were also affected. And it's inexcusable that a multi-billion-dollar subsidiary under a multi-trillion-dollar company just doesn't give their workers or family members a heads up about their employment being terminated. People discovered they couldn't access their workplace Slack accounts anymore without being told anything, so they're just kind of stuck in limbo. There were no emails or messages from management or HR, and since the QA union at ZeniMax had reached a tentative contract back in May, some affected in QA would receive severance packages, while those not specifically in the QA union, but in the union overall, would continue getting paychecks and officially remain staff for the foreseeable future while they work things out. Perhaps the least surprising thing about all of what happened at Zenimax Online Studios was Matt Fearer, the studio director of Zenimax Online Studios, handing his resignation to no one's shock after 18 years as Microsoft CFO Amy Hood had alluded to reducing management layers earlier in April, and it felt like with his emphasis in public events recently on ESO making $2 billion in revenue, that bragging felt more like an earnings presentation meant for Microsoft and shareholders than it did for the player base, which I think is even more obvious now given what's happened. As we only have outside perspective, we can assume a couple of scenarios here. The first is that Matt Fearer was pressured to quit and to preserve some benefits typical of American corporations in quitting and not being fired. He did so, and considering his age or how long he spent on a creative project, perhaps he just accepted the inevitable and quit. The second and more likely scenario is that Matt saw the shit show that was about to happen, especially after Project Blackbird was abruptly shut down, despite his possible efforts to stop the layoffs or project cancellation, and tendered his resignation in protest, further throwing his workers under the bus, essentially by setting up a triumvirate committee in his place that should raise some eyebrows. What's funniest to me about all of this, however, is the corporate bootlicking and desperate copium Elder Scrolls Online players have been posting with the usual apathy for the human cost of what's been going on behind the scenes, even clamoring for doubling the controversial monetization methods of the little talked about MMORPG so that it can avoid Microsoft's axe. Contrary to the cope, there would be no logic to reinvesting in a product that's already requiring a minimal level of staff and is now being built with easier levels of maintenance in mind. When I heard about subclassing from some friends, it was clear that the leadership has all but given up on the actual gameplay or combat balancing aspects. More than ever before, the product is more financially focused as a steady cash cow that would justify operations, help pay off acquisition debt, and it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone if more layoffs occurred in both the ZeniMax Online Studios and the other subsidiaries under ZeniMax Media. Perhaps the biggest clue to all what I'm saying here is that Matt left Joseph Burba as a new studio head with executive producer Susan Cath and game director Rich Lambert. Joe Burba has an interesting career history with NCSoft, 2K, Visual, and ZeniMax Online Studios, although he has never been the public face with the current IP. Meanwhile, game director Rich Lambert has an awful PR history of being tone deaf or unfathomably being incapable of meaningful human communication with the player base, prioritizing ego or professionalism. Susan Cath, for those who don't know, seems to be the gaming industry's cartoonish version of private equity. She was the business director over at Arcane Studios in Austin and may have been one of the voices with some power in regards to Arcane Austin's disastrous work on Redfall, which most of its developer team had pleaded with their leadership and later Microsoft to outright cancel Redfall due to terrible management and development work. Of course, as we all know with Redfall, production was rushed, turnover rate was high, the product flopped, and the reputation of the entire studio was smeared because of egotistic leadership that hedged bets on its brand name as a developer over the actual game's quality itself. And in the end, what happened to Arcane Austin? They got shut down alongside 3 other developer studios. And the fact that the leadership of ZeniMax Online Studios will be concentrated in a committee format doesn't bode well on top of what's already going on with both their product and the overall industry. For me personally, I've just been chilling in real life. I'm growing spinach, potatoes, bok choy, lettuce. I got 5 chickens I'm raising for eggs. I'm hiking in mountains, playing other games. So at this point, it's impossible to say that I don't feel vindicated by all of the news with this particular studio, especially after I was hounded and harassed, and especially after I told people, both developers and content creators, who approached me in private after my last ESO related video, what was happening and what would happen given prior statements issued by Microsoft and the other apparatus of leadership. Furthermore, with quite a few people revealing awful things of what happened to them behind the scenes that I didn't know about until after that video, I truly believe the leadership and management apparatus possess little humanity, which unfortunately means the people who actually put the passion and soul into game development at the studio will be laid off long before the executives and managers that need to go, instead, as the cash eventually runs out, and that's what we're seeing. This all leads to a bigger picture discussion of what's going on with Xbox Game Pass, which several other prominent developers have already brought up in the industry. For those who don't know, Microsoft is footing the bill for Game Pass as it's being run at a loss, which is why in recent times an even heavier emphasis on gaining subscribers have been pushed in the company to try to offset those expenses. But that seems a little unlikely given expectations for revenue or profit seem to be set too high internally in Microsoft, much like how EA is now suddenly expecting 100 million players playing somehow the next Battlefield. Though there are obviously short-term benefits for Game Pass exposure or services as well, but there is also a legitimate concern over when the money for Game Pass could also run out, given the overarching context of why these layoffs are happening in the first place. Microsoft is okay with footing said bill, at least for now, as the primary goal of Game Pass is to gain market share, even at a loss, and ultimately become a big enough ecosystem for gamers, but that in itself is also a big concern, because as I discussed in past videos, that ecosystem Microsoft and other companies are setting up is a consumer trap. Ubisoft with its Ubisoft Plus and policies gave us a spoiler early on with how such live service platforms would work to entrap consumers with somewhat unbridled access to a library of games. On paper, it sounds great to pay a subscription fee for, quote, unlimited games, but the question of future accessibility, akin to that of live streaming platforms such as Netflix, developer economics on sales, and price gouging users who will have a difficult time leaving said ecosystem are ever present threats that are usually not discussed. And since it presumably doesn't take as many staff as it does maintaining Xbox Game Pass, one can't help but feel uneasy that Microsoft learned the wrong lessons from the successful stories of games like Clear Obscure Expedition 33. Why invest millions into people and create something from the ground up instead of just being a host for other creators? And I don't think we're far off from that. And I think the only real solution here is for the consumer base to start moving more into indie spaces, speaking with their money rather than hoping for a big miraculous change with how these giant corporate entities work that clearly don't care about their workers, real creativity in the gaming space, or your rights as a consumer. Anyway, that's it for this video. In the next video, we'll probably be talking about the Stop Killing Games initiative and what all that means. So stay tuned, and I'll see you guys next time for that one.